deeper penetrating bubbles that cut through soap scum faster and easier than ever. The woman on the left.
This is a CBS News special report. Dan Rather at CBS News World Headquarters in New York with David Martin at the Pentagon. U.S. and British warplanes struck today at Iraqi air defenses on the outskirts of Baghdad. A Pentagon briefing on the attack is just about to get underway. U.S. officials are emphasizing that U.S. and British warplanes did not fly out of the southern so-called no-fly zone. What they did was go up to the edge of it and then fire stand-apart weapons.
Earlier this afternoon,
the briefing begins.
Coalition aircraft struck targets in southern Iraq, and I'm sure that many of you have questions on that. We have with us this afternoon the Director for Operations of the Joint Staff, Marine Corps Lieutenant General Greg Newbold. We'll walk you through some of the high points of that and take some of your questions. I will then follow up. He has only about 10 minutes or so here with us, and we'll follow up with additional questions as best we can. General?
Good afternoon. I'm going to use times that relate to Washington, D.C. time. So as I run through this, you can equate to what we have been doing here. At about 11:20 this morning, military aircraft in the Central Command region conducted an operation over Iraq. By 12:30 Washington, D.C. time, they were over target, and at that time began the recovery. And by about 1:40 our time, the aircraft had all cleared Iraqi airspace and were in the process of recovering to their stations. The military operation was conducted because the Iraqi air defenses had been increasing both their frequency and the sophistication of their operations. Both the frequency and the more sophisticated command and control of their operations had yielded an increased threat to our aircraft and our crews. It reached the point where it was obvious to our forces that they had to conduct operations to safeguard those pilots and the aircraft. As a matter of fact, it essentially a self-defense measure in conducting the operation. We struck 5 command and control nodes north of the 33rd parallel with 24 strike aircraft using standoff precision munitions. All indications we have are that the munitions and the strikes were conducted efficiently and effectively. We have no indications that there were any of the strikes that might have gone amiss. At no time did any aircraft go north of the 33rd parallel. And I would also note that all of these targets were picked because of the specific separation that they represented from non-military targets. Of course, the principal reason is that they pose a threat to U.S. aircraft. On the slide you'll see over here is a depiction of the area coverage of these radar sites, and it should be pretty evident that the range of these radars reach deep into the Operation Southern Watch area. And that was the reason that they posed such a threat. I'm going to show you next 2 examples of these types of radar. Tall King is the first one. And let's go to the second one. And all of the radar struck generally have ranges that can reach out extensively. You saw the rings represented on the map, but covered our aircraft not long after they entered Iraqi airspace on missions on nearly a daily basis.
Surveillance only, General?
Surveillance radar, but what they do is they then allow the Iraqi air defenses to coordinate their activities, and it was obvious to us that on nearly a daily basis they were posing an increased risk. So in order to continue to accomplish our mission and avoid the loss of aircraft, we had really no choice in this but to conduct the strike.
Had these radars just been established, or are they newly?
They've been accumulating over time. Generally, they've tried to use their radars south of the 33rd parallel, but as they do that and they use them to oppose our missions and to conduct attacks on our aircraft, over time they've lost their ability to do so as we've struck their radars and their air defense systems. So they have moved into what essentially they believe is a safe haven north of the 33rd parallel.
How far from Baghdad were those strikes?
Generally, the systems were between 5 and 20 miles. But again, I'd like to emphasize that we know precisely where they're located, and each one of them is in the middle of a unoccupied area, and we're picked for that reason.
Are there any restrictions for U.S. or British planes to remain in the no-fly zone? And is striking outside, above the 33rd parallel, in any way a change of policy or tactics by the United States?
The policy issues, you of course have to ask a policymaker, but from a military perspective, it makes eminent sense for us to conduct the missions as far as we can from their missile systems and from their radars, and that's why we did it from a standoff.
Then why did you make a point of saying that none of the aircraft crossed the 33rd parallel?
I think the point in saying that they didn't cross the 33rd parallel is really to indicate the distance from Baghdad, the fact that we are aware of our general zone of operations for these things and routine operations are south of the 33rd.
What kind of resistance did American aircraft encounter during this, and can you give us any idea of what British aircraft did in this strike?
The first question, as far as Iraqi attempts to interdict our strikes, we have heard that there were anti-aircraft artillery fired and some surface-to-air missiles, which we believe were fired ballistically, which means without the benefit of guidance, which makes it a little safer to those who shoot them.
Lieutenant General Greg Newbold of the Marine Corps doing the briefing at the Pentagon on what has happened today with U.S. and British airstrikes in and around Baghdad. When I say in and around, there were no strikes inside Baghdad proper, according to the latest information, that 5 command and control points, that's command and control of Iraqi radar missile defenses, were hit with 24 aircraft using so-called standoff munitions, which is to say the planes don't actually come over the targets. They flew to the upper regions of the southern fly zone, stood off, fired their munitions, which can go above that point and hit their targets. We go to David Martin at the Pentagon. David, let's put this in some context. Where does this fit in to American policy, U.S. policy and British policy vis-a-vis Saddam Hussein?
I don't think this represents a major change in policy. The briefer, Lieutenant General Newbold, said over and over again in various ways, this was self-defense. The nightmare for the U.S. and for Britain in enforcing this no-fly zone is losing a plane. And over the past several weeks, the Iraqis had been increasing both the volume and the sophistication of their anti-aircraft fire, both with guns and with missiles, and they were doing it by using these radars and control stations north of the no-fly zone, thinking that they could do that from a safe haven. And the military said the risk to the pilots flying those planes was just becoming unacceptable, and that's why they took them out. If that is the only motivation here, then this is not a new policy, because the U.S. has said all along that it will do everything it has to reduce the danger to those pilots.
David, this occurs against the backdrop of, among other things, number one, our new Secretary of State, retired General Colin Powell, is due to make his first trip as Secretary of State to the Middle East next week. And then also the sanctions that the United States and Britain and other former members of the coalition against Iraq have been trying to enforce, that particularly France and Russia have been in effect saying these sanctions are outdated. This happens against that whole backdrop, but from a military perspective, were either of those things did either figure into today's action?
I don't think so. There's a whole policy review going on about what to do about Iraq, what to do about the sanctions, which are just withering away. But this, I think, was just designed to head off what would be a catastrophe for U.S. policy in Iraq if the U.S. lost a single plane and Saddam Hussein got his hands on a single pilot. And I think that is the primary motivation here.
David Martin at the Pentagon. The headlines earlier today read, a U.S. bombed Baghdad. That is not precisely accurate. The U.S. and British aircraft have struck at command and control military installations around the southern rim of Baghdad. This has been a CBS News special report. Stay tuned to this CBS station for further updates as warranted. Your local news will have a lot about this today, and then join me for the CBS Evening News for a complete wrap-up of this and all the day's events. From CBS News World Headquarters in New York, Dan Rather with David Martin. Good day.
For news 24 hours a day, CBS.com on the internet and on our interactive partner, America Online, at keyword CBS News.
The dresses, the food, this escape, it equals kidnapping. Now where are the kids?
Your twins died. They were too little.
Enos, don't.
Hush now. They're dead, I'm telling you. I buried them myself.